church, a lot of people know me because I have a big smile. A lot of people know me because I sit behind the pulpit with the pastor. A lot of people know me because I lead prayers and because I preach the gospel. A lot of people know me, but they really don't know me. Come down to the preacher, pastor, minister position, whichever one you want to call it, there's a very simple concept that a lot of people just don't tend to grasp. And that's that there's not one side to it. There's two sides to that preacher position. And the general public only get to see one side, and that one side is the Sunday morning side. And a lot of times, you know, in church, everybody in the congregation knows that everybody is struggling throughout the week. But when Sunday morning comes, we all put on a mask and appear that everything is all right. But when you talk about the preacher, people tend to put the preacher up on a pedestal. And people just assume that the preacher has no struggle. The people assume that the preacher's life is 100% perfect. But little do they know what goes on when Sunday morning is over. Coming up as a child, you know, I always believed in Jesus and I always knew there was a God, but I just never really tended to take it serious. Jesus Christ just wasn't serious to me then when I was little. You know, and coming up in middle school, I began to get into music, and rapping became my dream. You know, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to grow up and be a rapper just like the guys you see on BET and MTV and things of that nature. But the stuff I was rapping about, it wasn't glorifying God, it was glorifying the devil. So I kept rapping, kept joining these groups, putting out little CDs and things of that nature. When high school was over with, I really didn't want to go to college, but I went anyways just to make the family happy. I went to college, and about 3 months later, I wound up dropping out. And when I dropped out of college, that was the worst and the most darkest time I ever had in my life. That was my darkest moment. And I went through a big state of depression. I was depressed 100% of the day. I remember coming to work sometimes, and a friend of mine said, Tyvon, you put on a good front like you happy, but deep down I know something is just killing you on the inside. And I would go home and I would cry constantly for like 3 months straight. And I didn't want to live, and I wanted to die. I didn't want to have nothing else to do with this earth. And as far as rapping is concerned, you know, you either make it or you don't. And it got to the point to where I said, you know what, this probably not gonna work out either. I quit rapping as well. So I quit rapping, and I'm a college dropout. And towards the end of 2008 and leading on into the beginning of 2009, a friend of mine's stepfather was starting up a church. So, you know, she invited me to come over. You know, they was having Bible study in their house, in the kitchen. And it got to the point to where I started to feel a little something in my heart. And I started to get drawn into it, and I started to pick up the Bible and actually read it and actually want to study and actually want to learn about all the different characters and people and know about the story that's really going on. And later on that year, 2009, in the month of July, I gave my life to Christ and I officially got baptized. And as time kept going on, the days and months, I started getting into it and into it and into it. And at that time, we had the church had got a church building. It had moved from his house. We actually got a official building. And he was preaching Sunday service, doing Sunday school, and doing Wednesday night Bible study. And it got to the point where, he was like, look, man, I got all this going on, and I got a job as well. Do you mind helping me out? And as I started doing that, a lot of people kept saying, I see it in you, Tyvon, you're going to be a preacher one day. And I would always say, no, not me. You got the wrong person. I'm just helping out. That's all I'm doing. I'm just helping the pastor out because he needs some help. Lord behold, about 6 months later, in November, I announced that God had called me to preach, and I did my first sermon. When I first started preaching, I was one of those fire and brimstone type of preachers. And it was so bad to where my mom, she would always say, Tyvon, if you ever became the pastor of a church, you wouldn't have no church members because you would start running everybody off. Because all the thing you talk about is stop sinning or you're going to hell every time. But as time went on and I started to mature and I began to observe things around me, I kind of had an epiphany. And I realized that I can preach and tell you stop sinning or you're going to hell all day long. You even look at your family members, the ones that's not saved. They might still be living in the world, but you want them to make a change right now on the spot. So you go witness to them and you go put the word on them, and you can put the word on them all day long. But until they ready to make a change, they not gonna change. But when I look around, I see friends of mine struggling, family members struggling, people on the news struggling, getting killed, people homeless, living on the side of the roads, everybody in church struggling, and everybody is suffering. And as I look at that, I begin to change and leave that fire and brimstone style behind, and I begin to, preach about hope. And a lot of people tell me nowadays that, you are the preacher that gives people hope. And that just inspires me to keep giving them hope and really just to encourage somebody who's just on their last leg to make it through another day. Don't give up, because a sunny day is going to be there tomorrow. When it comes down to this whole preaching thing, I try my best to study the art and the craft, and I try to study other preachers, to kind of take notes and give advice to myself. And I can honestly say that my style of preaching is a gift and a curse, so to speak. I grew up rapping. Rapping was my dream. So I'm used to rhythms and different types of patterns. So anytime I write my sermons out, there's an imaginary rhythm and pattern going off inside my head. So therefore, when I present my sermon, sometimes it may come off as if I'm rapping, but I'm just not rhyming. The downside to that is, since I'm so used to rhythms and patterns, if I preach the sermon once and 6 months later I decide to preach that sermon again at another church, it's harder for me because I have to remember the exact same rhythm and pattern that I preached it the first time or when I initially created it. And you'd be surprised at the amount of sermons I've scrapped because of that problem. There's times I'll put sermon ideas in my phone, in my voice memo. I'll say it, go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and it doesn't even make sense to me anymore because I'm so used to rhythms and patterns. And just sometimes it comes off right and sometimes it just doesn't. This whole preaching thing is my life. It's my everything. A lot of people go through their day stressing about how they're going to pay their bills, stressing about how they're going to pay their car note and pay this and that bill. But me, throughout my whole day, the only thing I'm thinking about is how can I be the best preacher I can be for the glory of God and His kingdom. I don't care about the money, the fame. Look my name on the billboard because I'm the pastor of a church. That don't mean nothing to me. I just want to be the best preacher I can be to touch the hearts and souls of people and help change lives and be effective through preaching God's word. I'm just like any other person sitting out in the church congregation. I got problems too, and I'm struggling just like they are on a day-to-day basis. But there's one thing I can honestly say, like I said, preaching is my only struggle. It's a mental struggle. But one thing I can honestly say, and that's that God has never left me hanging on my way to the pulpit. There's never been a time when I went to the pulpit and didn't know what to say. There's never been a time when I was asked to preach and the sermon didn't come together. Every time I went to the pulpit, God was always right there with me. And whatever you going through in life, it might not happen on your time, but when it come down to it, God will never leave you hanging. Just keep your faith and trust in Him. Let's turn in our Bibles to